Ethan Cole had built his life on silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, echoing quiet that settled deep into the bones after too many years of disappointment. His ranch stretched across miles of dry land, a place where the wind spoke louder than people ever did. He preferred it that way. After the accident that took his younger brother and the betrayal that followed from the woman he once trusted, Ethan stopped believing in companionship. But loneliness has a way of creeping in, even through the strongest walls. So when his old friend suggested a mail-order bride service, something simple, controlled, predictable, Ethan didn't laugh it off. He considered it like a business deal. No emotions, no surprises, just an agreement. He chose a profile that seemed safe. Her name was Alara Voss. Quiet, reserved, no family, no past complications. Exactly what he needed, or so he thought. Their communication was minimal, almost mechanical. A few letters, short replies, no unnecessary words. Alara never asked personal questions, never pushed boundaries, never revealed too much about herself. To Ethan, that was perfect. He imagined a woman who would blend into his world without disrupting it. A calm presence, someone who would cook, keep the house in order, and speak only when necessary. He didn't want love. He didn't want chaos. He just wanted less silence. The day her arrival was confirmed, he felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Not excitement, but a cautious curiosity. Still, he reminded himself, this was not romance. This was structure, control, a solution. The morning Alara was set to arrive, the sky turned an unusual shade of gray, clouds rolling in like a warning. Ethan stood by the wooden gate, arms crossed, his expression unreadable as the distant sound of an approaching vehicle broke the stillness. He expected hesitation, maybe even nervousness from her. What he didn't expect was the way the car door opened, with deliberate calm, nor the way she stepped out. She wasn't timid, she wasn't uncertain. She stood tall, her posture unwavering, her gaze sharp and observant as it swept across the land like she was assessing it. And when her eyes finally met his, Ethan felt it. A shift. Subtle, but undeniable. This wasn't the quiet, obedient woman he had imagined. Not even close. From the moment Alara crossed the threshold of Ethan's home, the balance he had carefully maintained began to fracture. She moved with purpose, not hesitation, placing her bag down, scanning the room, noticing details he himself had stopped seeing years ago. She didn't ask where things were. She figured them out. She didn't wait for instructions. She acted. It unsettled him. Not because she was loud or chaotic, but because she was precise, intentional, like someone who had lived many lives before stepping into his. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, but firm. "This place needs more than silence," she said, almost to herself. Ethan didn't respond, but the words lingered longer than he wanted them to. Days passed, and instead of fading into the background, Alara became impossible to ignore. She challenged him, not aggressively, but subtly. She questioned routines. She fixed things he had long abandoned. She even ventured into the barn, handling the horses with a confidence that didn't match the quiet bride he had signed up for. Ethan found himself watching her more often than he should, not out of suspicion alone, but because he couldn't understand her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he finally confronted her. "You're not what I expected," he said bluntly. Alara didn't flinch. Instead, she met his gaze steadily. "And you're exactly what I expected," she replied. That answer unsettled him more than anything else. The truth began to reveal itself in fragments. A scar on her wrist, the way she reacted to sudden noises, the guarded pauses in her otherwise composed demeanor. Alara wasn't just reserved, she was hiding something. And yet, she wasn't afraid. Not of him, not of the isolation. One night, a storm rolled in, fierce and relentless, forcing them into close quarters. The power went out, plunging the house into darkness. In that silence, something shifted. Without the barriers of routine and distance, they were forced to exist in the same space, truly present. "Why did you choose this?" Ethan asked quietly. For the first time, Alara hesitated. Then she answered, her voice softer than before. "Because I needed a place where no one would come looking." The words hit harder than he expected. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that Alara's arrival wasn't just coincidence. The more he observed, the clearer it became. She wasn't running aimlessly. She was hiding with purpose. And whatever she was escaping, it was serious. His instincts told him to keep his distance. This wasn't his problem. This was exactly the kind of complication he had tried to avoid. But something had already changed. The silence he once cherished now felt incomplete without her presence. When she disappeared one morning without a word, that realization hit him harder than he expected. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something dangerously close to fear. He found her at the edge of the property, staring out at the horizon as if expecting something, or someone. That's when the truth finally surfaced. Alara wasn't just a woman seeking refuge. She had been part of something dangerous, something powerful enough to force her into hiding under a false identity. "They won't stop looking for me," she admitted, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. Ethan should have walked away, should have told her to leave. But instead, he asked the one question he never thought he would. "Who are they?" Alara looked at him, really looked at him, as if deciding whether to trust him. "People who don't forgive," she said. "People who don't lose." The choice came faster than Ethan expected. When a black SUV appeared on the distant road days later, kicking up dust as it approached, there was no more time for hesitation. He could walk away, pretend none of this mattered, return to his quiet, controlled life. Or he could stand beside the woman who had disrupted everything, and somehow made it better. As the vehicle drew closer, Ethan stepped forward, placing himself between the approaching threat and Alara. His voice was calm, but unyielding. "You came here for silence," he said without looking back. "You're not getting it." For the first time, Alara smiled, not softly, not cautiously, but with something fierce and unbreakable. And in that moment, Ethan realized the truth. He hadn't just invited a bride into his life. He had invited a storm, and he was no longer afraid of it. The black SUV didn't slow as it approached. It calculated. Ethan could tell by the steady speed, the lack of hesitation, the way it cut through the dirt road like it had already mapped every inch of his land. These weren't lost strangers. They knew exactly where they were going. Behind him, Alara didn't move, but he could feel the shift in her presence, sharp, alert, ready. "You still have time to walk away," she said quietly, not as a warning, but as an option. Ethan almost laughed at that. A week ago, he might have taken it. But now the silence he once protected felt meaningless compared to the storm standing behind him. "Too late for that," he muttered. The SUV came to a stop just beyond the gate, engine idling like a predator waiting for permission to strike. 3 men stepped out. No rush, no panic. Confidence radiated from them like heat. The one in the center removed his sunglasses slowly, revealing eyes that didn't just look. They evaluated, measured, and dismissed all in a single glance. "Elara," he called out, his voice smooth but edged with something dangerous. "You've made this more complicated than it needed to be." Ethan didn't step aside. The man's gaze shifted to him, and for a brief second, something like amusement flickered across his face. "And you are?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. He didn't owe them anything. "The owner," he said finally, voice steady. "Which means you're trespassing." That earned a quiet chuckle from the others, but the man in front didn't laugh. He simply tilted his head slightly, studying Ethan like he was deciding how much trouble he'd be. Elara stepped forward then, finally breaking the invisible line Ethan had drawn. "You shouldn't have come here," she said, her tone calm but firm. The man sighed, almost disappointed. "You know that's not how this works." There was history in his voice, unfinished business wrapped in control. Ethan could feel it now. This wasn't just about finding her. This was about ownership, power, and Elara had taken something from them, or refused to be something for them. The tension snapped when one of the men took a step closer. Instinct took over. Ethan moved before he thought, blocking the path. The silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. It was loaded. And for the first time in years, Ethan realized something. He wasn't just protecting his land. He was protecting her. They didn't attack. Not yet. Instead, they left with a warning, a promise disguised as patience. "We'll give you time," the man had said before stepping back into the SUV. But not much. When the dust finally settled and the sound of the engine faded into the distance, the ranch felt different, smaller somehow, exposed. Ethan turned to Elara, the questions he had been holding back now impossible to ignore. "Start talking," he said, not harshly, but firmly. This time she didn't deflect. She didn't avoid. She exhaled slowly, like someone preparing to reopen a wound. "They're not just men," she began. "They're part of something bigger, an organization that doesn't exist on paper, but controls things that do." Her story came in pieces, but each one hit harder than the last. Elara hadn't always been hiding. Once she had been inside that world, trained, controlled, used. Not willingly, not entirely. But survival had forced her to adapt. She learned their systems, their secrets, their weaknesses. And then, one day, she made a choice. To leave. Not just leave, but take something with her. Something valuable enough that they couldn't ignore it. "What did you take?" Ethan asked. Elara hesitated, then met his gaze. "Leverage," she said simply. "The kind that makes powerful people very nervous." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, processing it all. This wasn't just danger. This was war waiting to happen. "You should go," Elara said suddenly. "This isn't your fight." But Ethan shook his head almost immediately. "It became my fight the moment they stepped onto my land." The words surprised even him, but they were true. He wasn't the man he had been before she arrived. Something had shifted, something deeper than logic or caution. Elara studied him carefully, as if trying to understand why he was choosing this. "You don't even know me," she said quietly. Ethan held her gaze. "I know enough." And somehow, that was more honest than anything else he could have said. For the first time since she arrived, Elara didn't look guarded. She looked uncertain, not of danger, but of trust. They came back at night. Not with warnings this time, but with intent. Ethan had been expecting it. The air itself had felt different, heavier, like the land was holding its breath. When the first sound broke the silence, a faint crunch of gravel beyond the house, he was already awake. "They're here," he said quietly. Alara didn't ask how he knew. She just nodded, already moving. There was no panic between them, no wasted motion, just understanding. Whatever this was, they would face it together. Outside, shadows moved where shadows shouldn't. The hunt was over. This was the end game. The confrontation was fast, brutal, and precise. These weren't reckless men. They were trained. But so was Alara. And Ethan. Ethan had something they didn't expect. Nothing left to lose. The quiet man they had dismissed became something else entirely under pressure. Every movement was deliberate, every decision sharp. He wasn't fighting for pride or territory anymore. He was fighting for something he hadn't realized he wanted. Connection. Purpose. Alara moved beside him, not behind him, not in front, but with him. Equal. Unyielding. Whatever she had been before, whatever she had escaped, she wasn't that person anymore. And she wasn't alone. When it was over, the silence returned. But it wasn't the same. It wasn't empty. It wasn't heavy. It was earned. The kind of silence that comes after surviving something that should have broken you. Ethan stood on the porch, watching the first light of dawn stretch across the land. Behind him, Alara stepped out, her presence steady, no longer guarded. "You could still leave," she said softly, though there was no real weight behind it this time. Ethan shook his head, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "I expected quiet," he said. Then he glanced at her. "Guess I was wrong." Alara didn't look away this time. "And?" she asked. Ethan's answer came without hesitation. "I don't want it anymore." And just like that, the man who built his life on silence chose the storm, and everything that came with it. The aftermath should have brought relief. But instead, it brought questions. Too many of them. The men who came weren't amateurs. And if that was just a fraction of what was coming, then whatever Alara had taken wasn't just valuable. It was explosive. Ethan sat at the wooden table, staring at the small metal drive she had finally placed in front of him. It looked ordinary, harmless, but the weight of it, that told a different story. "This is what they want?" he asked. Alara nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "This is what they fear," she corrected. That distinction mattered more than Ethan liked. When they finally accessed the contents, the truth didn't unfold, it detonated. Files, names, transactions, hidden networks operating behind legitimate systems. Powerful individuals tied to illegal operations spanning continents. It wasn't just corruption, it was control. Governments influenced, lives erased, systems manipulated. Ethan leaned back, running a hand over his face as the reality settled in. "This isn't leverage," he said quietly. "This is destruction." Alara didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice carried something heavier than before. "That's why I couldn't let them keep it." For the first time, Ethan understood. She hadn't just run. She had chosen to fight. But power like that didn't disappear quietly. "If this gets out," Ethan started. "It won't," Alara cut in. "Not easily." There were safeguards, dead drops, encrypted triggers. If anything happened to her, pieces of the truth would start leaking, but not fast enough to stop retaliation. "They'll burn everything to contain this," Ethan said. Alara met his gaze. Then we don't let them control the timing. That was the moment the shift happened. They weren't hiding anymore. They were planning, and the storm that had arrived at Ethan's quiet life was about to spread far beyond his land. Preparation changed everything. The ranch wasn't just a home anymore. It became a defense point, a strategy base, a line in the sand. Ethan reinforced what he could. Old tools became weapons. Open land became advantage. But the real change wasn't outside. It was inside him. He wasn't reacting anymore. He was anticipating. And Alara? She wasn't running anymore. She was leading. The quiet, controlled woman he had expected never existed. What stood beside him now was someone forged in pressure, shaped by survival, and driven by something deeper than fear. And somehow, they worked. But the closer they got to exposing the truth, the more dangerous it became. Signals were intercepted, movements tracked. The organization wasn't guessing anymore. They knew where she was. "They're tightening the net," Ethan said, watching the horizon through binoculars. Ilara nodded. "Because they're running out of time." But there was something else now, something unspoken between them. This wasn't just about survival anymore. Somewhere between the tension, the trust, and the choices they had made, something real had formed. Not fragile, not uncertain, but dangerous in its own way, because it gave them something to lose. The message came at dusk, not through force, but through precision. A single shot fired into the wooden post near the house. Attached, a note, clean, direct, final. "Midnight, come alone, or we take everything." Ethan's jaw tightened as he read it. "It's a trap," he said immediately. Alara didn't argue. "Of course it is." But her calm wasn't reassuring this time. It was decisive. "I'm going," she said. Ethan stepped in front of her instantly. "No." This wasn't negotiation. This was instinct. But Alara's gaze didn't waver. "If I don't, this doesn't end." The silence between them wasn't empty, it was conflict. And neither of them were used to backing down. Midnight arrived with a stillness that felt unnatural, like the world itself was waiting. The meeting point sat just beyond the edge of Ethan's land, where control ended and uncertainty began. Alara walked forward without hesitation, every step measured, every breath controlled. But she wasn't alone. Not really. Because even though Ethan had agreed to stay behind, he wasn't the kind of man who could walk away anymore. Not now. Not from her. The shadows ahead shifted, and they stepped out. The same man, the same calm authority. But this time, there was no patience in his eyes. "You've caused enough disruption," he said, his tone colder than before. "Give it back." Ilara didn't move. "You mean the truth?" she replied. The tension snapped tight. "You think exposing this changes anything?" he asked, almost amused. "People like you always think that." Alara's voice didn't rise, but it sharpened. "People like me are the reason people like you get exposed." For a brief moment, something flickered across his expression. Not anger, not fear, but calculation. Then his gaze shifted slightly. "You didn't come alone." That's when Ethan stepped out of the darkness. Everything after that moved fast, but the real moment wasn't the confrontation. It wasn't the weapons. It wasn't the danger. It was the choice. Because in that second, standing side by side again, they both understood something clearly. This wasn't just about ending a threat. This was about deciding what came after. The man smiled faintly. "You could have lived quietly," he said to Ethan. "But you chose this." Ethan didn't hesitate. "No," he said calmly. Then, glancing briefly at Alara, he added, "I chose her." And just like that, the final line was drawn. Not in the dirt, not in the fight, but in the decision that neither of them would ever go back to who they were before. The moment Ethan stepped out of the shadows, everything shifted. There was no more illusion of control, no more calculated distance. This was direct, immediate, dangerous. The man in front of them didn't raise his weapon right away. He didn't need to. The confidence in his posture said enough. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice quieter now, more focused. "This doesn't end the way you think it does." Ethan didn't respond. He had already made his choice. And choices like this didn't come with guarantees. They came with consequences. Beside him, Alara stood steady, but he could feel the tension in her. Not fear. Not exactly. Something deeper. Something like finality. "You still have one option," the man continued, his eyes fixed on Alara. "Give it back. Walk away. And he lives." The words hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Ethan didn't even look at her, but he felt it. That moment. That impossible weight pressing down between them. This wasn't strategy anymore. This was sacrifice. Alara's fingers tightened slightly at her sides, her mind racing through outcomes, probabilities, consequences. She had spent her entire life